June 3rd, 1943. 9:42 a.m. Above the English Channel, 14,000 feet, and climbing. Oberleutnant Karl Reinhardt steadies his gloved hands on the edge of the cockpit. The morning sun casts a silver sheen across the clouds. He leans forward, binoculars pressed to his face. Beneath him, a quiet stretch of English countryside, rolling fields, stone cottages with mossy roofs, a village church. Nothing moves, just wind over grass and a few lazy sheep chewing through the hedgerow. He narrows his eyes. Smoke curls gently from chimneys, the kind of smoke that says tea is boiling. Nothing more. He smirks. They're still asleep, he mutters, switching to the intercom. No visible defense activity, no troop movement, just farmland and fools. The pilot beside him chuckles. It's the 6th recon flight over this sector. Each time, the same report. No visible anti-air, no hangars, no rail activity. Sector B-17, inactive. Reinhardt scribbles in his notebook. Back in Berlin, these notes will feed into the map rooms. Decisions will be made, targets assigned, bombs loaded. And this village, this silent patch of nowhere, will be marked safe. But something is off. Reinhardt notices it just as the plane banks left. A shadow falls wrong. A cottage window has no glass glare, and a barn's roof almost ripples. He blinks, but it's already gone. He shakes his head, laughs softly, probably fatigue or bad angle. He tightens the strap on his cap and marks the page. No threat. What he doesn't know, not yet, is that this sleepy little village is no village at all, and by the time he realizes it, it will already be too late. 3 days later, inside Luftwaffe Command near Amiens, Karl Reinhardt stood over a map, glowing with blue pins. Behind him, fans creaked in the summer heat. The air smelled of sweat and stale paper. "You see," he said, tapping a circle drawn in red. "Here. Nothing but grazing land. Again here. B-17 sector. No fuel depots, no hangars, no runways." A major leaned in, nodding. "We'll redirect the bombers to Southampton." Another officer scribbled notes in quick, angular German script. Orders moved fast in the Third Reich. By June 1943, the Luftwaffe had re-established aerial dominance over parts of the French coast. Their confidence was returning. Operation Sea Lion had failed, yes, but new intelligence promised fresh opportunity. German reconnaissance teams flew over southern England daily. Row upon row of farmland appeared untouched. No camouflaged bunkers, no troop gatherings, no signs of mass deployment. It didn't make sense, but it made them feel safe. Back in England, near Canterbury, the illusion deepened. A crew of British soldiers stood beside a wooden farmhouse, except it wasn't wood. It was canvas painted to mimic brick, with nailed-on shadows for depth. Nearby, what looked like a kilometer tower was hollow. Inside, radio antennas hummed with Allied chatter. And under one fake haystack, an entire fuel tanker waited quietly. The British called these K sites decoy airfields. But to the Germans watching from above, They were just quaint villages. The deception was deliberate and cinematic. The British War Office had recruited artists, sculptors, even set designers from London's film industry. They built roads that led nowhere. Shadows painted at specific angles. Trees glued into perfect rows. From the sky, it looked British. Too British. Almost like a propaganda reel. But no one questioned it. Because on the German side, the data looked clean. Fuel levels were measured. Routes calculated. Villages labeled as civilian. Karl Reinhardt believed it all. He wasn't the only one. By mid-July, over 240 fake sites were operational across England. Dummy tanks, empty barracks, silent hangars made of fabric and plywood. The maps they fed Berlin were beautiful, but every line, every road, every dot was a lie. August 2nd, 1943. Midnight. Over the Kent countryside. The Luftwaffe Dornier bomber sliced through low clouds. Rain peppered the fuselage like fingers tapping on metal. Inside, Feldwebel Otto Lenz squinted through his bomb sight. The target was simple, a sleepy farming village marked low priority on their recon maps. But tonight, Berlin wanted to test incendiaries. Lenz aligned the crosshairs over a cluster of cottages. He saw the glow of chimney smoke. Too uniform. Too smooth. He hesitated. The bomb dropped. A hollow boom echoed seconds later, not the rumble of fire catching timber. No orange plume. No rising heat. Well, just silence. Back at base, the debrief was short. Hit confirmed. Minimal resistance. Lenz frowned. There was no fire. His commander didn't look up. You dropped it too shallow. Wind scattered the ignition. But the roof? We'll try again tomorrow. He left the room with a sick feeling in his stomach. The next night, a new pilot flew the same route. Bombs rained down. Same spot. Same silence. Weeks passed. The same pattern. They hit houses, but never heard scream. They saw chimneys, but never saw collapse. On one flight, a gunner photographed a rooftop before impact. In the darkroom, under red light, something strange appeared. The smoke didn't blur with the wind. It rose in a perfect column, like steam from a pipe. A technician, young, overlooked, nameless in records, traced the edges of the photo. That's not a fire, he whispered. That's a smoke machine. His report never reached command. Instead, it was filed under optical inconsistency. Karl Reinhardt received none of this. From his post, the data still confirmed stability. The villages were marked inert. The British, according to maps, were repositioning north. But in the skies, something was wrong. Too many ghost strikes. Too many empty craters. And one night, a reconnaissance officer walked into Reinhardt's tent. "Sir," he said, holding up a photo. It showed the same village, hit 12 times. Not a single collapsed wall. Chimneys still smoking. Reinhardt stared for a moment. "Send it to Berlin." he said, turning away. But he never signed the dispatch. Outside, another pilot climbed into his bomber, heading back to the same patch of illusion, unaware that what he'd bomb might already be rebuilt before sunrise, or worse, had never been real to begin with. September 11th, 1943. Just before dawn. A new recon drone, the latest pride of the Luftwaffe, hummed above Sussex. Below, fog drifted across meadows. Cattle stood still in fenced fields. Church bells rang faint in the distance, too perfectly timed. The drone's infrared lens swept over a clearing and paused. Heat. Not a building, not a fire, just the ground, warm and square. The analyst reviewing the footage rubbed his eyes. It wasn't possible. Nothing should burn there. No fire, no motor activity. But the outline was unmistakable. A hidden hangar beneath a grazing field. The earth itself was pulsing heat. That same week, another anomaly emerged. A barn roof from aerial stills shifted slightly, just a few inches, enough to suggest movement. A retractable roof. Inside Luftwaffe Command, the findings caused tension. "We need confirmation," Karl Reinhardt said. His voice was firm. "Send manned recon." 2 nights later, a Messerschmitt buzzed low over the same coordinates. The pilot, a decorated ace, saw nothing unusual until he looked again. A man stood in the field, waving. A farmer, perhaps. But the farmer didn't flinch as the plane passed overhead. He held his stance, rigid, too rigid. Through the lens, the pilot saw a glint, not from a scythe, but from the edge of a propeller. A Spitfire's wingtip, buried under netting, painted to match soil. And that farmer was wearing a flight suit under his jacket. The pilot broke altitude and raced home. Back in command, Reinhardt reviewed the report in silence. "I need photos," he said. But photos only deepened the unease. Trees that cast no shadows. Sheep that hadn't moved in days. A village fountain that reflected nothing, because the water was painted glass. From the air, it all looked real. But only from the air. On foot, the deception collapsed, but no one could land to check. Reinhardt began marking maps with a new code. Not civilian or military, but a third category. Unverifiziert, unverifiable. And every week, that category grew. By October, nearly 1/3 of the recon maps were flagged that way, yet Berlin refused to acknowledge it. "We bombed a supply line," they insisted. But every convoy they struck turned out to be rubber tires and hollow frames. The British had built not just fake fields, but breathing illusions, roads that rippled under heat, shadows that changed with the sun. Entire forests that could be rolled up and trucked away by dawn. And Reinhardt, proud Luftwaffe strategist, was beginning to feel something he'd never allowed in the war. Doubt. Real, crawling doubt. October 23rd, 1943. Near Dover. Dawn raid. The mission was clear. Luftwaffe Command had identified a major Allied runway, stretching east to west through a supposed civilian zone. They called it Objective Falcon. 30 Heinkel bombers lifted into the sky before sunbreak. each one loaded with high explosive ordnance, guided by satellite imagery, recon sketches, and the absolute belief that under those hedgerows lay Britain's hidden muscle. Karl Reinhardt watched from the ground, not in uniform this time, but in a long civilian coat, visiting an observation post near Calais. He wanted to see it for himself. Through field binoculars, he tracked the squadron's arc. Every second, anticipation built. 2 hours later, the first radio came through. Bombs released. Target neutralized. No resistance encountered. By noon, reconnaissance planes returned. The photos arrived an hour later. Reinhardt walked into the darkroom, the chemical scent thick. The technician handed him the prints without a word. He examined the first, green fields, untouched. He frowned. The next, a long meadow, still smooth. Then sheep, calmly grazing across what should have been a crater. He flipped through 5 more. No blackened earth, no scattered debris, not a single collapsed structure. Reinhardt's hand tightened on the edge of the table. He pointed. This was the center line of the runway, yes? Yes, Oberleutnant, the technician said quietly. Reinhardt stepped back. For a moment, the hum of the power generator was the only sound. Check the impact reports, he said finally. Did any bombs hit? All detonated, the tech replied. Coordinates matched the maps. Our men confirmed target alignment. He looked up. Then where are the holes? That evening, Reinhardt requested a low-altitude overflight. He insisted on reviewing it himself. 24 hours later, the new footage came in. There it was. The same field. Undisturbed. Not even a scorch mark. But now, something else caught his eye. A small cottage near the tree line, with a chimney, just like before. Only this time, a shadow fell across the roof at the wrong angle. It wasn't built wrong. It was painted that way, to trick the eye. His mouth went dry. He pulled a red pencil from his coat and circled the structure, then another, then another. They never had a runway, he whispered. Sir? Reinhardt didn't answer, because in that moment, a memory flashed, from months earlier, above Sector B-17. That barn roof, that shimmer, he had seen it then, and ignored it. He looked down at the photos again. Clean, quiet, harmless, a lie. And for the first time in his career, Karl Reinhardt wrote something new in the margin of the recon report. Target, optical illusion, no military value, deception confirmed. He signed it, closed the folder, and sat there in silence. Because now he knew he'd spent the last 4 months bombing ghosts. November 2nd, 1943. British countryside, west of London. A small unit of Royal Engineers sipped tea beside a church that wasn't real. The stones were painted wood, the steeple, scaffolding, and canvas. Inside the church, rows of pews were stacked with cables, radios, and painted props. At the center of the operation stood a man in civilian boots and a weathered trench coat. Geoffrey Barkas, not a soldier, not an officer, but once a film director. Now, the architect of illusions. Across the southern half of England, Barkas led a secret division. the Camouflage Development and Training Center. Their job wasn't to build fortifications, but facades. Decoy tanks made of rubber. Whole airstrips that vanished by noon. Convoys assembled from scaffolding and burlap, detailed down to tire marks dragged by farmhands with boots on ropes. It was war, as theater. And every act fooled the Reich. Captured British documents, first intercepted by Luftwaffe signals intelligence. Mentioned Barkas by name. A footnote in a logistics briefing. Harmless, at first glance. But as Karl Reinhardt read further, something twisted in his gut. The document detailed dozens of Type Q sites, entire fake military zones, maintained by civilian artists, electrical engineers, and carpenters. They had blueprints for shadows, charts for smoke patterns, scripts for deception. One page included light diagrams showing how to position fake searchlights so they cast just enough glow to resemble anti-air installations, without functioning at all. Another described livestock movement as part of illusion. Shift sheep every 4 hours to simulate natural grazing. Avoid fixed patterns. Reinhardt set the papers down. He stared at the lantern above his desk, its yellow bulb flickering in rhythm with his pulse. The Luftwaffe had invested years in photographic detail, altitude mapping, terrain studies, and they were outwitted by theater school graduates. He turned to a younger officer nearby. "Do we have any confirmation this Barkas was captured?" "No, sir. He's still active. We believe near Reading." Reinhardt's eyes narrowed. "Then he's still building, still painting roads, still scripting ghosts, still placing trees in deliberate rows to fool the best eyes of the Reich." That night, Reinhardt couldn't sleep. The wind outside howled. Every rustling tree branch against the barracks felt suspect. Every shadow under moonlight, deliberate. His dreams twisted. Villages that blinked out when touched. Planes sinking into fields. Men saluting from cardboard towers. And behind it all, one man calling action. A man with no rank, no gun, just a vision and a paintbrush. December 18, 1943, Tempelhof, Berlin, war room. The air stank of tobacco and urgency. A report arrived on the Führer's desk, stamped dringend. It described a new Allied buildup near Calais. Armored divisions, fuel reserves, landing crafts in vast rows, all spotted from high-altitude reconnaissance. It looked real, because that's exactly what it was meant to look like. The name of the operation, Fortitude. What Hitler didn't know, what Karl Reinhardt now realized, was that none of it existed. What the Germans saw was a ghost army, inflatable tanks, parked in fake columns, plywood landing craft, bolted to mud, sound engineers playing truck convoys through hidden loudspeakers. Even radio operators, real men, mimicking the chatter of an entire corps, using scripts fed by British intelligence. Reinhardt sat in silence as news came in. Hitler ordered panzer divisions to hold position near Calais, convinced the invasion would strike there. But the real invasion was brewing elsewhere, Normandy, and by the time German command realized it, the beaches were on fire. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Thousands of Allied troops stormed the coastline, while entire Wehrmacht divisions sat idle near Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. A masterstroke of misinformation. And it all began with the fake airfields Reinhardt had once marked harmless. He stared at the Normandy reports, the casualty numbers, the maps redrawn overnight. "We built bunkers against bombs," he whispered, "but not against lies." Across the channel, General Patton, the very ghost at the center of the deception, posed next to dummy tanks. His presence alone, amplified by the Allies, had convinced the Reich their worst fear was real. And it wasn't just machines. Captured German agents, turned on double, had fed Berlin nothing but fiction for months. A web of illusion so dense, even the Luftwaffe's finest couldn't see through it. Not Reinhardt, not the generals, not even Hitler. Inside his tent, Reinhardt opened his old recon logs. He flipped back to the first day over Sector B-17. That shimmering barn, that painted roof. He thought of every pilot he'd sent, every raid that hit air, every command he gave, certain of its logic. He gripped the edge of his table, and then, quietly, he laughed. Not from joy, but from the cold, bitter taste of understanding. "We saw everything," he said aloud to no one, "and understood nothing." July 1944, Southern England. While German command scrambled to explain the Normandy disaster across the Channel, something even stranger was being unpacked from American trucks. It wasn't tanks. It wasn't fuel. It was theater equipment. Miles of wire, speaker arrays, giant rolls of canvas. Tools not for killing, but for convincing. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had arrived. Known unofficially as the Ghost Army, they were artists, set designers, architects, even Broadway sound engineers, conscripted by the U.S. Army, with one mission: to deceive. They carried no rifles, but they moved entire armies with rubber and sound. Karl Reinhardt received the first reports in early August, scattered intercepts from field intelligence units near Reims. Civilians swore they had seen a U.S. division enter the forest, only for it to vanish the next day. Tracks remained. Boot prints, engine marks, even spent rations, but no men. A week later, French resistance fighters confirmed no American unit had entered that zone. And yet, the ground told a different story. One report noted tank tread marks, looping in figure eights, too perfect, too clean. "Simulated," Reinhardt muttered, studying the photos. The Americans were not just fooling eyes, they were fooling the earth. Behind these illusions stood American logistics, the invisible force the Axis never understood. The British might have conceived camouflage, but the Americans industrialized it. Thousands of inflatable tanks shipped in standardized crates. Sound libraries categorized by terrain and vehicle. Teams deployed with mathematical precision. They could simulate an entire armored division in 6 hours and vanish again before sunrise. And then they'd do it again 40 miles away. They weren't improvising. They were manufacturing deception like they manufactured trucks, on schedule, in bulk, with terrifying efficiency. And it wasn't random. Each illusion was coordinated with real Allied movements, timed to split German divisions, to pull artillery in the wrong direction. The 23rd never fired a shot, but some historians would later credit them with saving 15,000 lives and costing Reinhardt the war. Because while he pored over Wuhan images, corrected bombing maps, reissued orders with new coordinates, the Americans were already gone. Not ghosts, just faster, harder. And backed by an engine of production, Reinhardt's country could no longer match. He flipped through another report, a diagram showing inflatable vehicles packed in Ford crates, printed on the side. Replace after 30 uses. They weren't built to last. They didn't need to. Because for the Americans, everything was temporary, except their victory. August 1944. Frankfurt Interrogation Center. Rain tapped against the steel shutters. Karl Reinhardt sat across from a British officer in plain uniform. No rank insignia, no decorations. Just a name tag, Morris. They weren't talking tactics anymore. They were talking culture. "Why artists?" Reinhardt finally asked. Morris sipped his tea. "Because artists know how to make people believe things that aren't true." Reinhardt's hands twitched slightly. The Reich had built its war machine on precision, on engineering, mathematics, hierarchy. Each division had a purpose. Each man, a role. Illusions had no place in the German order. But the Allies, they thrived on chaos. Where the Wehrmacht built bunkers, Americans built stories. Where German officers wrote orders, Allied troops improvised. It was an alien logic. Reinhardt remembered standing in a Luftwaffe planning hall, surrounded by blueprints, every bolt, every beam calculated. And now, he was being told the most decisive weapon was uncertainty. Morris continued calmly. "In your system, imagination is a liability. In ours, it's doctrine." The British and Americans didn't just deploy soldiers. They deployed minds. People who designed theaters now designed war zones. People who built city sets now built fake divisions. And they were given freedom, the kind Reinhardt's command could never allow. A camouflage designer once redirected an entire German bombing run, not with orders, but with brushstrokes. He painted shadows where shadows shouldn't fall, slanted rooftops to confuse aerial depth. No rank, no uniform, just instinct and authority. In Germany, that man would have been court-martialed for breaking architectural codes. In Britain, he was promoted. Reinhardt thought of Jeffrey Barkas again, the film man who fooled at half the Luftwaffe. What scared him wasn't Barkas's skill, but the system that allowed a civilian to command military units. Because in Nazi Germany, loyalty outranked logic. But in the West, logic had learned to masquerade as madness. Reinhardt looked up. Why didn't we see it? Morris smiled, not unkindly. Because you were looking for factories, and we gave you fiction. Outside, the rain slowed. In that moment, Reinhardt wasn't just witnessing defeat. He was witnessing a chasm between two civilizations. His, built on control. Theirs, built on creation. And when creation goes to war, even truth can be weaponized. September 1944, German High Command. The war room was quieter now. The chatter had dulled. Maps were still updated daily, but no one trusted them. The data had been wrong too many times. Karl Reinhardt sat beside a mountain of declassified reports, and a single question burned in his mind. How much had they lost to things that weren't yet real? The numbers began to stack. The British alone built over 250 dummy airfields across the countryside, most complete with painted runways, false radio towers, and planes made from stretched canvas and bicycle wheels. They burned entire villages just to make fakes more believable, letting real towns die to sell a lie. And the Germans fell for it. Every time. Berlin approved over 3,400 bombing raids on targets later confirmed as decoys. That's millions of Reichsmarks, thousands of tons of fuel, and hundreds of airmen wasted. A full 17 were of all Luftwaffe sorties in 1940 targeted structures that never existed. They bombed painted barns, inflatable tanks, cardboard factories. Once, Reinhardt saw photos of a strategic oil depot leveled by a precision strike. It was a set, built in 2 days by stagehands from London's West End. The tanks were drums filled with water, wrapped in reflective tarps. Even the smoke was piped in from a chemical van hidden in the woods. He found a memo from a captured German general, Feldmarschall Wilhelm Meindl. It read simply, "They were painting war, and we believed the canvas." But the worst number wasn't in any report. It was time. Every raid wasted, every bomb misused, every false positive. It delayed real intelligence, redirected critical fuel convoys, moved panzer divisions away from where they were needed most. One entire Luftwaffe wing was grounded for 3 weeks, all because their fuel depots had been hit in France. Except they hadn't. They were just covered in painted tarps and dummy debris. Reinhardt had once joked, long ago, that British defenses seemed designed by children with crayons. Now, he knew that wasn't far from the truth. Only the crayons had been wielded by architects, the canvas stretched by engineers, and the story directed by men who understood something the Reich never did. Perception is power. Not bullets, not bombs, but the illusion of both. He closed the folder, leaned back in his chair. Outside, bombers rumbled in the distance, probably targeting another ghost. He whispered a final thought into the stale air. They didn't need to kill us. They just had to make us waste everything. March 1945. Somewhere in occupied Germany, snow drifted across the wreckage of a collapsed railway station. Karl Reinhardt stood alone, staring at a photograph in his gloved hand. He had carried it for months. It showed a quiet English village, the one from Sector B-17, thatched rooftops, lazy sheep, church bell tower. He had seen it 6 times from the air. He had marked it as harmless. And now, after all the reports, after Normandy, after Fortitude, after the ghosts and the painted smoke, he knew what it really was. Not a village, a stage, a trap, a war machine built from nothing, designed to devour belief. In the photo, Smoke still curled from a chimney. But now Reinhardt saw the hose that fed it, the shadow painted on the roof, the sheep, mannequins placed at intervals. Everything had meaning. Everything had lied. A staff sergeant passed him, nodding respectfully, eyes sunken. Another paper in his hands, casualty lists, retreat orders, supply chains cut again. The Reich was unraveling. Not from bombs, not from tanks, from wasted time, from chasing shadows. Reinhardt tucked the photo away. He stepped outside the station. Snow cracked under his boots. In the distance, an American truck rumbled past, the canvas flapping loose, revealing crates stamped with bold black letters. 23rd HQ, Special Troops. The Ghost Army. Still moving, still deceiving, still alive. A young American GI leaned against the hood, sipping something hot. Coffee, maybe. He looked up, gave a casual nod. For a moment, their eyes met. The boy was no older than 20, and behind him, another crate was being unloaded. It read, Sound Generator, Convoy Rumble, Forest Terrain. Reinhardt looked away. Because this wasn't war anymore. This was theater, and he had been the audience. He walked toward the horizon, his boots vanishing into white. The photo still burned in his pocket. The village that killed an army. A final thought came to him, bitter as iron. We built tanks like monuments. They built lies like rivers. And then, a second whisper, colder than the wind. They drove rubber trucks, and we followed them into history.